our customer, OneWeb, a connectivity wholesaler that delivers high-speed, low-latency connectivity solutions to telecommunications companies, internet service providers, local governments, businesses, and communities everywhere. Hello everyone, my name is Jesse Anderson. I'm a production engineering manager here at SpaceX, and I'll be your host for the OneWeb Launch 16 mission, which marks our 201st overall mission to date. As the mission name suggests, this is OneWeb's 16th overall launch and second with SpaceX. Similar to our previous launch with OneWeb last month, tonight's launch will also send 40 OneWeb satellites into low Earth orbit, bringing their LEO constellation to over 80% completion with 542 satellites in space. Now tonight we will deploy OneWeb satellites in 3 different deployment sequences, and as a note, part of the second and potentially the third deployment sequence will begin during a blackout period. Now, if we're able to regain connection with the second stage earlier than that, then we'll be sure to provide live coverage, so stay tuned. Now, if you're interested in reviewing the full deployment schedule, check out SpaceX.com. Now, at T-minus 11 minutes and 45 seconds, the weather, range, and vehicle are all go for launch. If for some reason we do not launch today, we do have a backup opportunity on Tuesday, January 10th at 11:45 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, with that, let's learn a little bit more about OneWeb and today's mission.
Think for a moment about what connectivity brings you. Is it helping you manage or grow a business, stay in contact with family and friends? Is it giving you or your family access to education or to a doctor? Is it opening doors for you to a world beyond your horizon? Of course, for many of us in big cities and large and established communities, it's doing that every day. It's essential, fundamental, it's enabling our lives. From connectivity flows a better quality of life, new horizons and greater opportunities. So what can we do to help ensure everybody can experience the benefits of connectivity? This is the OneWeb mission, to bridge that digital divide, to serve businesses and rural communities, to further scientific understanding and collaboration. And we're doing this by bringing high-speed broadband internet from space to places where this opportunity was previously unimaginable. Every customer connected via the OneWeb network has their own story. All of them are united by one thing: gaining the power of connectivity and the independence or sense of community that can bring.
OneWeb, we are a global connectivity provider powered by satellites to connect the unconnected globally. And we are doing this with a low Earth orbit constellation of 648 satellites. We run satellites 30 times closer to the Earth than traditional satellites. We do this because we can deliver high-speed connectivity to be hundreds of megabits per second, delivered to a single user terminal. Connectivity is highly concentrated around densely populated areas. OneWeb really wants to bring connectivity to remote places. With a satellite constellation, we can reach everyone, everywhere, effectively bringing on a level playing field all of these people that have been left behind.
Water is life, but connectivity is everything else, right? It's education, it's healthcare, it's being able to start your own small business. I mean, just look at all the stuff you do on a day-to-day basis in an urban environment, and think if that's cut off for even a few hours, how anxious you get. There's over 300 communities in Canada that we think will never. They're satellite communities. We don't think they'll ever have connectivity going in. They're just too far away to run fiber. They're too far away to get 4G or 5G. The only option for them will be satellite internet.
I'm taking classes to get my bachelor's degree in administration in the early childhood field. With the internet, it's made it a lot easier. I can see my professors during class. I can collaborate with my classmates.
OneWeb has helped in a lot of ways. It's more convenient for us, like ordering supplies and payments over the phone.
It is great to work with SpaceX. They are a fantastic partner. It's been very nice and exciting to start working with them and OneWeb.
We're really looking forward to the launch with SpaceX. It's very important for us because it will enable us to extend our commercial coverage 25 degrees north to the North Pole and 25 degrees to the South Pole, and we'll be able to do that by next summer, the summer of 23.
With liftoff just 7.5 minutes from now, let's get to know a little bit more about the rocket that you're looking at there on your screen. Falcon 9 is our two-stage rocket, which stands 230 feet or 70 meters tall. Now that's roughly 20 meters taller than the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, France, which is 49 meters tall. Now, when it's fully fueled, it'll hold just over 1 million pounds of propellant that the vehicle will burn through in less than 3 minutes after liftoff. Now we begin loading those propellants on both stages of the vehicle at T-minus 35 minutes.
Engine kill started.
Now starting from the top of the vehicle, our payload today is safely enclosed inside of the 17-foot diameter payload fairing, which is the structure at the very top of the rocket. This protects the satellites from aerodynamic heating, loads,
on internal power.
Aerodynamic heating, loads, and contamination during ascent. Now once we reach the vacuum of space, we will jettison the fairing halves while the second stage continues to orbit. Now below the payload fairing, we have the second stage that will take the OneWeb Launch 16 mission payload to a low Earth orbit. The satellites on board the second stage today are produced by OneWeb Satellites, a joint venture between OneWeb and Airbus located on Merritt Island, Florida. Second stage will ignite its single Merlin vacuum, or what we call the MVAC engine, about 2.5 minutes into flight, and then relight for a second time before we deploy the 40 satellites. Now below the second stage, we have the inner stage, which is part of the first stage. As you can see on your screen, the carbon fiber inner stage is a distinct black color, and that's because it's unpainted TPS, or thermal protection system. Now this protects the composite material that the inner stage is made of. At the bottom of the first stage, there are 9 Merlin engines that will get Falcon 9 off of the ground and up into the thinner parts of the Earth's atmosphere. And shortly after liftoff, the first and second stages will separate from one another. Then the second stage will continue to orbit while the first stage will start to make its way back down to Earth. The first stage is designed to be reflown with minimal refurbishment between flights. Now, the first stage supporting today's mission will be flying for the second time and attempt landing at Landing Zone 1, which is not too far from where it will lift off. Now, if we're successful in recovering the booster on screen, it will mark the 162nd successful recovery of an orbital class booster. And lastly, the large trusted structure that you see there next to the vehicle is called the transporter erector, or the TE, or which you may have heard called the strongback on the nets. Now we use it to roll the rocket out to the launch pad and raise it to its vertical launch position. The TE also routes the vehicle's fluids, power, and telemetry umbilicals from the ground systems to the rocket and satellites until Falcon 9 goes on internal power and clears the pad. Now at liftoff, it will retract in order to clear the way for Falcon 9's
Strongback
ascent.
lower has started.
And we did hear that call out that the sequence will begin. That means that the clamp arms, which are right below the fairing there that you see on your screen, they will open up first. Once they are fully open, then the TE can begin to recline away from the vehicle. Now at T0, ground hydraulic systems will pull the TE even further away from Falcon 9 as it lifts off. And on your screen, it looks like the clamp arms are now just about fully open. This means that the TE will begin to retract away from the vehicle. Now the first stage is connected to a launch mount at the base of the TE, but the structure is hinged and will retract away from the vehicle in preparation for launch. And it is just very slight on your screen, but the TE should be almost fully reclined at this point. So at this point in the countdown, both the first and second stages are nearly fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. Both first stage and second stage should finish prop loading about a minute apart from each other. The first stage coming up here at the T-minus 3 minute mark. Second stage will be about a minute afterwards at the T-minus 2 minute mark. And perfect timing, there's that call out. That liquid oxygen loading is complete on the first stage. Now, the white clouds that you see around the vehicle is the chilled gas above the liquid oxygen tank liquid surface that we vent overboard to maintain pressure in the tank as needed. So when that gas comes out into the Florida air, the humid, moist air condenses into clouds or water, which is what you see there. At T-minus 60 seconds, Falcon 9 will be in startup. This means that the rocket's autonomous internal flight computers have taken over the launch countdown. Just inside T-minus 2 seconds, we light the Merlin 1D engines for liftoff. The OneWeb Launch 16 payload continues to be healthy, and the Falcon 9 team is tracking no issues on the vehicle. Weather is still looking good for T0, and the range is green for launch. So if for some reason we do not launch today, we do have a backup opportunity on Tuesday, January 10th at 11:45 p.m. Eastern Time. Now just waiting for the call out for propellant loading on stage 2.
Stage 2, lock load complete.
Perfect timing. There's that call out. With prop loading complete on stage 2, that concludes propellant loading on Falcon 9, which means it's now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. Now you can kind of see a lot more of those white clouds that I mentioned on your screen.
Yes, launch closeouts.
That is because we are venting out the liquid oxygen line on that transporter erector. We are just clearing out the line in preparation for liftoff. Coming up next is Falcon 9 in startup. Again, that will be where the internal flight computers take over the launch countdown. That is because this Falcon 9 vehicle is autonomous.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And great news, Falcon 9 is now in startup. We are now just waiting for the launch director's final call.
SpaceX launch director, go for launch.
And excellent news, all systems are go for launch of Falcon 9 with the OneWeb Launch 16 mission payload.
T-minus 30 seconds. Seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engines full power and liftoff of Falcon 9. Go Falcon, go OneWeb 2. Pitching downrange.
Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral, carrying the OneWeb Launch 16 mission payload. Now, during ascent, we tilt the engines, which is what we call gimbaling. That turns
power and telemetry.
That turns the rocket horizontally, which is what we call a gravity turn. Now, we're still going up, but we are now also heading horizontally away from the launch pad.
Vehicle supersonic.
Moments ago, we did throttle down the engines on the first stage in preparation for Max Q, which is coming up here in a few seconds.
Max Q.
Great news, we have just passed through the largest structural load that the vehicle sees on ascent. Really awesome views here of the first stage vehicle. Now, the rocket typically needs to go 17,500 miles per hour horizontally in order to avoid being pulled back down to Earth and to get into orbit. So you can keep an eye out on the stage 1 telemetry, and that's on the bottom left hand of your screen. Again, incredible views of the first stage vehicle, first stage engines lighting up there. We do have 5 events coming up here back to back. That will be MECO, main engine cutoff, stage separation, stage 1 flip, SES1, the boost back burn on the first stage, and then we will also have the fairing halves deploy. Again, that is a few events happening in quick succession: MECO, stage separation, stage 1 flip, SES-1, boost back burn, and fairing deploy.
And MECO. Stage separation confirmed. And back ignition. Stage 1, boost back startup.
There we have just seen all of those events, really cool views. We had MECO, stage separation, stage 1 flip, which you can kind of see in the background of the second stage vehicle's view. Awesome view here of the first stage in its boost back burn right now. We also had second stage engine startup 1, which is that MVAC engine lighting up on the right-hand screen. Now next up will be the conclusion of the first stage boost back burn, and then shortly after followed by the fairing deploy.
Stage 1, boost back shutdown.
And there you can see on your left-hand screen as those engines shut down on the first stage. That concludes the boost back burn for the first stage vehicle.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And also got an awesome view of fairing deploy there on your screen. Now those fairing halves,
Both vehicles are following nominal trajectories.
those fairing halves, one flew for a 6th time and the other for a 7th time, and we will be attempting to retrieve these fairing halves again today once they fall back down to Earth using our recovery vessel Doug today. Now we are T plus 4 minutes and about 15 seconds into today's mission, and we are in the first of 2 planned MVAC burns before satellite deployment. Now on your screen on the left-hand side is a view from the first stage. It is a little bit dark there, but when we do come up on the entry burn, which is at T plus 6 minutes and 20 seconds, you should see those 3 engines reignite on your screen. And that entry burn is where we reignite these 3 engines, and that helps slow the vehicle down as it passes back into the Earth's atmosphere. Now we need to slow the vehicle down to reduce re-entry forces, which helps us recover and reuse the first stage vehicle. Now during the entry burn, Falcon 9 is decelerating by firing its Merlin engines. We're also still moving rapidly, so this causes the vehicle to fly through its Merlin exhaust gases, which is also what we refer to as the rocket's plume. And this deposits a layer of soot on the vehicle surface. Now that soot comes from the carbon-based fuel that Falcon 9 uses. And we are just about 30 seconds away from that entry burn beginning on the first stage. On your right-hand screen is a view from the second stage, looking at that MVAC engine glowing very bright there. Now, stage 1 is making its way back to land, and you can see the Cape Canaveral there in the background of your left-hand screen just a little bit. It will perform 3 burns for landing. It already completed the boost back burn, now coming up on the entry burn, followed by the landing burn.
Stage 1, entry burn startup.
Great news, as you heard that call out and can see on your screen, we have reignited 3 of the 9 M1D engines on the first stage. That's the center E9 engine, followed by the E1 and E5 engines.
Stage 1, entry burn shutdown. Stage 1, FTS is saved.
It's less than a 20-second burn, and as you can see, the engines have shut down. That concludes the entry burn for the first stage
Both
vehicle.
vehicles continue to follow nominal trajectories.
Now we are just about 30 seconds away from the landing burn beginning on the first stage vehicle. It is just the E9 engine that will ignite for landing, and the M1D engines have about 190,000 pounds of thrust. So one engine reigniting is just enough to help slow the vehicle down in time to touch down for landing.
Stage 2, FTS is safed. Stage 1 landing burn.
There you can see the landing burn has begun on Falcon 9. Let's watch as the first stage touches down on landing zone 1.
Landing leg deployed. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
Wow, an awesome view of our landing. As you just saw, Falcon 9 has touched down on landing zone 1. That marks SpaceX's 162nd recovery of an orbital class rocket.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
And that includes first stage landings for both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. Now coming up shortly here, we will have SECO 1, that is second stage engine cutoff 1. That is where we will shut down this MVAC engine and allow the vehicle to coast with the payload before its second burn. And that's coming up here in just a few seconds.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And great news, we have had SECO 1 as well as that call out confirming a good orbit. Now the mission isn't over just yet. The second stage is now embarking on its first coast phase. After the coast phase, we will light that MVAC engine for a second time around T plus 55 minutes. We'll see you back here in about 45 minutes, and in the meantime, enjoy the space tunes.
Expected loss of signal, keep.
Acquisition of signal, point to NS. Expected loss of signal, point to NS. Acquisition of signal, troll. system neutral. Acquisition of signal, Diego Garcia.
We sat there in 25th century AD. We sat there and looked at a rocket from Mars, and you just boggled the mind and mind and mind and mind. And the technology caught up, didn't it?
Acquisition of signal, Maldives.
Welcome back to the webcast of the Falcon 9 mission carrying the OneWeb Launch 16 mission satellites for our customer, OneWeb. We've had a nominal mission so far. Falcon 9 launched on time at 11:50 p.m. Eastern Time from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral. We successfully recovered the first stage back on landing zone 1, and this was the second landing for this booster, as well as the second stage has completed its first burn. Now we are just about 45 seconds away from the second ignition of the MVAC engine, which will carry the second stage and the OneWeb Launch 16 mission payload into the orbit needed to deploy the satellites. Now this burn will be super short. It lasts only just a couple of seconds, but is enough thrust to allow the vehicle to coast to its next targeted drop-off orbit for the payload. Now again, we are just about 15 seconds away from SES-2, or second stage engine start 2, and SECO-2, which is second stage engine cutoff 2. Coming up here in just a few seconds.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And great news, we did have confirmation of a good orbit. That means that we did have SES-2 and SECO-2. The OneWeb Launch 16 mission payload is now still attached to Falcon 9's second stage. Now coming up next, we do have 3 separate deployments of all 40 satellites. Now the first set of satellite deployments is scheduled to occur in just a couple minutes from now. After the first block of satellites are deployed, the second and third deploy sequences will likely begin in a blackout period. Now, once we regain connection to our second stage, we'll come back live to confirm successful deployments of the satellites that deployed during the blackout period and cover the rest of the deployments left in each sequence. Now, luckily, we should have coverage of the entire first deployment sequence, which will deploy 14 satellites. Now, deployment should start here in just a little over a minute and a half from now. But if you're just now joining us, welcome to our webcast for the OneWeb Launch 16 mission. So far, we've had a nominal mission with liftoff at 11:50 p.m. Eastern Time from Space Launch Complex 40 in Florida. We also had a successful recovery of the first stage for the second time for this booster. Stage 2 has now completed its 2 burns for this mission. And again, we are just about a minute away from the first payload deployment sequence. Again, that is the first of 3 sequences for deploying the payloads on this mission. Just as a reminder, we should have full live coverage for the first deployment sequence, but the second and third deployment sequence may begin in a blackout period. If so, then we will confirm the deployments that happen during that blackout period, and then we will be live for the remainder of the satellites that are deploying during those sequences. Now, as a reminder, OneWeb is a connectivity wholesaler that provides connectivity solutions at scale in pursuit of bridging the digital divide around the world. Now, today's mission will mark OneWeb's 16th overall launch and bring their LEO constellation to over 80% completion with 542 satellites in space. Now we are just a few seconds away from the first set of satellites beginning to deploy from the second stage. So let's listen into the nets and keep our eyes on the live screen there.
OneWeb, Sat Alpha 1 and Alpha 5, separation confirmed.
And good callouts there. We've had the first two satellites deploy.
OneWeb, Sat Alpha 4 and Alpha 8, separation confirmed.
And there we've had the second set of satellites deploy. That confirms 4 of the 14 in this first deployment sequence. We're currently in
OneWeb, Sat Bravo 1 and Bravo 5, separation confirmed.
And great call out there, and you can actually see the satellites deploying, drifting away from second stage there. That confirms 6 of the 14 have deployed.
OneWeb, Sat Charlie 1 and Charlie 5, separation confirmed.
And another couple have been confirmed as well. That is 8 of the 14 in this deployment sequence.
Expected loss of signal, Diego Garcia.
OneWeb, Sat Alpha 2 and Alpha 6, separation confirmed.
And a really cool view of that one right there. We did see a satellite drifting away from second stage with callouts on the nets of the confirmation of deployment. We're roughly 30 seconds away from the next set of satellites that will be deployed in this deployment sequence.
OneWeb, Sat Bravo 4 and Bravo 8, separation confirmed.
Great news, and we did see in the top left-hand corner of the screen, another set of satellites have been deployed from the Falcon 9 second stage. And that confirms 12 of the 14 satellites in this deployment sequence. So we are just waiting for a couple more, which should be deploying here shortly.
OneWeb, Sat Alpha 3 and Alpha 7, separation confirmed.
And great call out there. And we also were able to see the last 2 satellites in this deployment sequence drift away from Falcon 9. So with confirmation of successful deployment of the first 14 OneWeb satellites from the second stage, we are heading into a coast phase that contains a blackout period. Our second deployment sequence is scheduled to start around T+1 hour and 14 minutes. We should regain connection with our second stage at T+1 hour and 17 minutes. And if we do, we'll be sure to confirm the deployments that happened during the blackout period and bring you live coverage of the rest of the second deployment sequence. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if we're able to regain ground station coverage earlier than expected, then we'll be sure to provide live views, so stay tuned. For now, sit back and enjoy the space views.
And expected loss of signal, Bangalore.
Welcome back to the OneWeb Launch 16 mission webcast. So far, we've had a nominal mission with an on-time liftoff, first stage landing, and 2 second stage burns, as well as successful deployment of the first 14 OneWeb satellites. Now, during the blackout period, we should have started our second payload deployment sequence around the T+1 hour and 14-minute mark. And once we regain connection to our second stage shortly, our operators on console should be able to confirm the satellites that deployed during the blackout period, and we should be able to bring you live views of the rest of the 8 satellites set to deploy in this sequence. Now that is coming up in just under a minute from now, where we should be able to regain ground station coverage and provide you live views. Again, if you're just now joining us, we are currently in a blackout period. We should have begun our second payload deployment sequence around the T+1.
OneWeb spacecraft separations confirmed.
And great news. We did have confirmation.
Signal Svalbard.
We had confirmation of 5 payload deploys, as well as regained ground station coverage, as you can see live there. Satellites drifting away from Falcon 9's second stage.
OneWeb, Sat Charlie 3 and Charlie 7, separation confirmed.
That additional 2 satellites confirms 7 in this deployment sequence.
OneWeb, Sat Delta 4 and Delta 8, separation confirmed.
And there you can see another set drifting away from the second stage. There is a total of 13 in this deployment sequence, and we do have 4 satellites left. If you're just now joining us, we are in the second deployment sequence of 3. We deployed 14 in the first deployment sequence. We have 13 scheduled to deploy in the second deployment sequence. And so far we have deployed 9 and are awaiting 4 more satellite deployments in this deployment sequence.
OneWeb, Sat Delta 3 and Delta 7, separation confirmed.
Great live views there as you watch the satellites drift away from Falcon 9. That confirms another 2, and we just have 2 more for this deployment sequence.
OneWeb, Sat Charlie 2 and Charlie 6, separation confirmed.
And as you heard and can visually see on your screen, we've had the last 2 satellites deploy in this deployment sequence, and that confirms successful deployment of all 13 satellites in the second deployment sequence. Now, so far, we've deployed 27 of 40 total satellites in today's mission. Our third and final payload deployment sequence should begin around the T+1 hour and 29-minute mark, but we likely won't have ground station coverage until 3 minutes after the third deployment sequence begins. Now, if we're able to connect to a different ground station earlier, we'll be sure to bring real-time views of deployment in, but for now, relax and enjoy some more space tunes.
Expected loss of signal, Svalbard. Acquisition of signal, Kodiak.
Hello again, and welcome back to the OneWeb Launch 16 mission webcast. We're coming up on the third and final payload deployment sequence, which should deploy another 13 OneWeb satellites. Looks like we do have a live view there, so we will just wait for the operators on console to confirm callouts.
OneWeb, sat Echo 3 and Echo 7, separation confirmed.
Awesome, and we did get a confirmation of 2 satellites deploying. That confirms a total of 29 that have deployed so far.
OneWeb, Sat Bravo 3, separation confirmed.
And great news, we did have confirmation of another 2 satellites deploying. Again, this is the 3rd deployment sequence of 3. That puts us at 31 satellites having deployed so far.
OneWeb, Sat Delta 1 and Delta 5, separation confirmed.
Great news, another 2 satellites have deployed.
And expected loss of signal, Kodiak.
And we did just hear a call out that we did have an expected loss of signal. That means we do not have ground station coverage. We will wait to regain ground station coverage and confirm any deployments that are happening during this blackout period once we regain ground station
OneWeb,
coverage.
Sat Echo 8, separation confirmed.
Great news. There you can see on your screen
OneWeb, Sat Echo 4, separation confirmed.
several satellites drifting away from Falcon 9.
Acquisition of signal, Vandenberg.
And there's that call out that we did regain ground station coverage. And we have deployed 34 satellites so far out of the 40 for today's mission.
OneWeb, Sat Delta 2 and Delta 6, separation confirmed.
And again, as you can see on your screen, as well as hearing that call out, another 2 satellites have deployed from Falcon 9's second stage. That is 36 total out of the 40. We have 4 more satellites left to deploy.
Acquisition of signal, South Texas.
Now, if you're just now joining us, you are watching the OneWeb Launch 16 mission. And we are currently in the 3rd deployment sequence out of 3. This is the final deployment sequence for the 40 satellites. So far, we have deployed 36 of the 40. We have 4 more left.
OneWeb, Sat Echo 2 and Echo 6, separation confirmed.
Make that 2 more left with these 2 drifting away from the second stage.
OneWeb, Sat Echo 1 and Echo 5, separation confirmed. All 40 OneWeb satellite separations confirmed.
With a live view out in space, you can see the last 2 satellites drifting away from Falcon 9's second stage. And as you heard, that does confirm successful deployment of all 40 OneWeb satellites. Now, all of us here at SpaceX want to give a big thank you to our customer, OneWeb, for entrusting us with today's mission. We also want to give a shout out to the Range and Federal Aviation Administration for supporting today's mission. Tonight's launch concludes our 201st overall SpaceX mission to date and second launch of the year. Thanks to all of our viewers for tuning in and your continued support. Have a great night, and we'll see you again soon.